Solomon's wisdom and his officials. Chapter 3. The Lord makes Solomon wise. This is also told in 2 Chronicles 1:1-13. Solomon signed a treaty with the king of Egypt and married his daughter. She lived in the older part of Jerusalem until the palace, the Lord's temple, and the wall around Jerusalem were completed. At that time, there was no temple for worshiping the Lord, and everyone offered sacrifices at the local shrines. Solomon loved the Lord and followed his father David's instructions. But Solomon also offered sacrifices and burnt incense at the shrines. The most important shrine was in Gibeon, and Solomon had offered more than 1,000 sacrifices on that altar. One night, while Solomon was in Gibeon, the Lord God appeared to him in a dream and said, "Solomon, ask for anything you want, and I will give it to you." Solomon answered, "My father David, your servant, was honest and did what you commanded. You were always loyal to him, and you gave him a son who is now king. Lord God, I'm your servant, and you've made me king in my father's place. But I'm very young and know so little about being a leader. And now I must rule your chosen people, even though there are too many of them to count. Please make me wise and teach me the difference between right and wrong. Then I will know how to rule your people. If you don't, there is no way I could rule this great nation of yours." God said, "Solomon, I'm pleased that you asked for this. You could have asked to live a long time or to be rich. Or you could have asked for your enemies to be destroyed. Instead, you asked for wisdom to make right decisions. So I'll make you wiser than anyone who has ever lived or ever will live. I'll also give you what you didn't ask for. You will be rich and respected as long as you live, and you will be greater than any other king. If you obey me and follow my commands, as your father David did, I'll let you live a long time." Solomon woke up and realized that God had spoken to him in the dream. He went back to Jerusalem and stood in front of the sacred chest, where he offered sacrifices to please the Lord and sacrifices to ask his blessing. Then Solomon gave a feast for his officials. Solomon makes a different decision. One day, two women came to King Solomon, and one of them said, "Your Majesty, this woman and I live in the same house. Not long ago, my baby was born at home, and 3 days later, her baby was born. Nobody else was there with us. One night, while we were all asleep, she rolled over on her baby, and he died. Then, while I was still asleep, she got up and took my son out of my bed. She put him in her bed. Then she put her dead baby next to me. In the morning, when I got up to feed my son, I saw that he was dead. But when I looked at him in the light, I knew he wasn't my son." "No," the other woman shouted, "he was your son. My baby is alive. The dead baby is yours." The first woman yelled, "Mine is alive." They argued back and forth in front of Solomon until finally he said, "Both of you say this live baby is yours. Someone bring me a sword." A sword was brought, and Solomon ordered, "Cut the baby in half. That way each of you can have part of him." "Please don't kill my son," the baby's mother screamed. "Your Majesty, I love him very much, but give him to her. Just don't kill him." The other woman shouted, "Go ahead and cut him in half. Then neither of us will have the baby." Solomon said, "Don't kill the baby." Then he pointed to the first woman. "She is his real mother. Give the baby to her." Everyone in Israel was amazed when they heard how Solomon had made his decision. They realized that God had given him wisdom to judge fairly. Chapter 4. Solomon's officials. Here is a list of Solomon's highest officials while he was king of Israel. Azariah, son of Zadok, was the priest. Elihoreph and Ahijah, sons of Shisha, were the secretaries. Jehoshaphat, son of Ahilud, kept the government records. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was the army's commander. Zadok and Abiathar were priests. Azariah, son of Nathan, was in charge of the regional officers. Japhuk, son of Nathan, was a priest and the king's advisor. Ahishar was the prime minister. Adoniram, son of Abda, was in charge of the first labor. Solomon chose 12 regional officers who took turns bringing food for him and his household. Each officer provided food from his region for 1 month of the year. These were the 12 officers. The son of Hur was in charge of the hill country of Ephraim. The son of Decker was in charge of the towns of Makkah, Sharbim, Beth Shemesh, and Elon Beth Hanan. The son of Hesed was in charge of the towns of Arupoth and Soko and the region of Hefer. The son of Abinadab was in charge of Naphath and was married to Solomon's daughter Taphath. Baana, son of Ahilud, was in charge of the towns of Tanakh and Megiddo. He was also in charge of the whole region of Bethshan near the town of Zarethan, south of Jezreel, from Bethshan to Aber Meholah to the other side of Jokmeam. The son of Geber was in charge of the town of Ramoth in Gilead and the villages in Gilead belonging to the family of Zair, a descendant of Manasseh. He was also in charge of the region of Argob in Bashan, which had 60 walled towns with bronze bars on their gates. Ahinadab, son of Iddo, was in charge of the territory of Mahanaim. Ahimaaz was in charge of the territory of Naphtali and was married to Solomon's daughter Basemath. Baana, son of Hushai, was in charge of the territory of Asher and the town of Bealoth. Jehoshaphat, son of Paruah, was in charge of the territory of Issachar. Shimei, son of Elah, was in charge of the territory of Benjamin. Geber, son of Uri, was in charge of Gilead, where King Sihon of the Amorites and King Og of Bashan had lived, and one officer was in charge of the territory of Judah. The size of Solomon's kingdom. There were so many people living in Judah and Israel while Solomon was king that they seemed like grains of sand on a beach. Everyone had enough to eat and drink, and they were happy. Solomon ruled every kingdom between the river Euphrates and the land of the Philistines down to Egypt. These kingdoms paid him taxes as long as he lived. Every day Solomon needed 5,000 liters of the fine flour, 10,000 liters of coarsely ground flour, 10 grain-fed cattle, 20 pasture-fed cattle, 100 sheep, as well as deer, gazelles, and geese. Solomon ruled the whole region west of the river Euphrates, from Tiphsah to Gaza, and he was at peace with all the countries around him. Everyone living in Israel, from the town of Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south, was safe as long as Solomon lived. Each family sat undisturbed beneath its own grapevines and fig trees. Solomon had 40,000 stalls of chariot horses and 12,000 chariot soldiers. Each of the 12 regional officers brought food to Solomon and his household for 1 month of the year. They provided everything he needed, as well as barley and straw for the horses. Solomon's wisdom. Solomon was brilliant. God had blessed him with insight and understanding. He was wiser than anyone else in the world, including the wisest people of the East and of Egypt. He was even wiser than Ethan the Ezrahite and Mahor's 3 sons, Heman, Kalkol, and Darda. Solomon became famous in every country around Judah and Israel. Solomon wrote 3,000 wise sayings and composed more than 1,000 songs. He could talk about all kinds of plants, from large trees to small bushes, and he taught about animals, birds, reptiles, and fish. Kings all over the world heard about Solomon's wisdom and sent people to listen to him teach. Building and dedication of the Jerusalem temple. Chapter 5. Solomon asked Hiram to help build the temple. This is also told in 2 Chronicles 2, 1-16. King Hiram of Tyre had always been friends with Solomon's father David. When Hiram learned that Solomon was king, he sent some of his officials to meet with Solomon. Solomon sent a message back to Hiram. Remember how my father David wanted to build a temple where the Lord his God could be worshipped, but enemies kept attacking my father's kingdom and he never had the chance. Now, thanks to the Lord God, there is a peace in my kingdom and no trouble or threat of war anywhere. The Lord God promised my father that when his son became king, he would build a temple for worshiping the Lord. So I've decided to do that. I'd like you to send your workers to cut down cedar trees in Lebanon for me. I will pay them whatever you say and will even make my workers help them. We both know that your workers are more experienced than anyone else at cutting timber. Hiram was so happy when he heard Solomon's request that he said, I am grateful that the Lord gave David such a wise son to be king of that great nation. Then he sent back his answer, I received your message and will give you all the cedar and pine logs you need. My workers will carry them down from Lebanon to the Mediterranean Sea. They will tie the logs together and float them along the coast to wherever you want them. Then they will untie the logs and your workers can take them from there. To pay for the logs, you can provide the grain I need for my household. Hiram gave Solomon all the cedar and pine logs he needed. In return, Solomon gave Hiram 2,000 tons of wheat and 400,000 liters of pure olive oil each year. The Lord kept his promise and made Solomon wise. Hiram and Solomon signed a treaty and never went to war against each other. Solomon's workers. Solomon ordered 30,000 people from all over Israel to cut logs for the temple, and he put Adoniram in charge of these workers. Solomon divided them into 3 groups of 10,000. Each group worked 1 month in Lebanon and had 2 months off at home. He also had 80,000 workers to cut stone in the hill country of Israel, 70,000 workers to carry the stones, and over 3,000 assistants to keep track of the work and to supervise the workers. He ordered the workers to cut and shape large blocks of good stone for the foundation of the temple. Solomon's and Hiram's men worked with men from the city of Gebar, and together they got the stones and logs ready for the temple. Chapter 6. The outside of the temple is completed. Solomon's workers started building the temple during Ziv, the 2nd month of the year. It had been 4 years since Solomon became king of Israel and 480 years since the people of Israel left Egypt. The inside of the Lord's temple was 27 meters long, 9 meters wide, and 13.5 meters high. A 4.5-meter porch went all the way across the front of the temple. The windows were narrow on the outside but wide on the inside. Along the sides and back of the temple, there were 3 levels of storage rooms. The rooms on the bottom level were just over 2 meters wide. The rooms on the middle level were over 2.5 meters wide, and those on the top level were just over 3 meters wide. There were ledges on the outside of the temple that supported the beams of the storage rooms, so that nothing was built into the temple walls. Solomon did not want the noise of hammers and axes to be heard at the place where the temple was being built. So he made the workers shape the blocks of stone at the quarry. The entrance to the bottom storage rooms was on the south side of the building, and stairs to the other rooms were also there. The roof of the temple was made out of beams and cedar boards. The workers finished building the outside of the temple. Storage rooms just over 2 meters high were all around the temple, and they were attached to the temple by cedar beams. The Lord told Solomon, If you obey my commands and do what I say, I will keep the promise I made to your father David. I will live among my people Israel in this temple you are building, and I will not desert them. So Solomon's workers finished building the temple. The inside of the temple is furnished. This is also told in 2 Chronicles 3:8-14. The floor of the temple was made out of pine, and the walls were lined with cedar from floor to ceiling. The most holy place was in the back of the temple, and it was 9 meters square. Cedar boards standing from floor to ceiling separated it from the rest of the temple. The temple's main room was 18 meters long, and it was in front of the most holy place. The inside walls were lined with cedar to hide the stones, and the cedar was decorated with carvings of gourds and flowers. The sacred chest was kept in the most holy place. This room was 9 meters long, 9 meters wide, and 9 meters high, and it was lined with pure gold. There were also gold chains across the front of the most holy place. The inside of the temple, as well as the cedar altar in the most holy place, was covered with gold. Solomon had 2 statues of winged creatures made from olive wood to put in the most holy place. Each creature was 4.5 meters tall and 4.5 meters across. They had 2 wings, and the wings were just over 2 meters long. Solomon put them next to each other in the most holy place. Their wings were spread out and reached across the room. The creatures were also covered with gold. The walls of the 2 rooms were decorated with carvings of palm trees, flowers, and winged creatures. Even the floor was covered with gold. The 2 doors to the most holy place were made out of olive wood and were decorated with carvings of palm trees, flowers, and winged creatures. The doors and the carvings were covered with gold. The door frame came to a point at the top. The 2 doors to the main room of the temple were made out of pine, and each one had 2 sections so they could fold open. The door frame was shaped like a rectangle and was made out of olive wood. The doors were covered with gold and were decorated with carvings of palm trees, flowers, and winged creatures. The inner courtyard of the temple had walls made out of 3 layers of cut stones with 1 layer of cedar beams. Work began on the temple during Ziv, the 2nd month of the year, 4 years after Solomon became king of Israel. 7 years later, the workers finished building it during Bur, the 8th month of the year. It was built exactly as it had been planned.